Today's video is all about patch 10.4. We finally have the patch notes and oh my goodness, is there some crazy stuff in here. We're gonna go over all the big changes and even the small ones to make sure you guys know exactly what's going on so you can win your games. Smash that like button, destroy the sub button, and let's jump right in. Now you might think that we were gonna start off with the champion changes, but no, because for some reason, this patch, Riot has decided to just ring the bell of doom. This change on its own is going to completely redefine the entire meta that we're playing in right now. So you guys know those burny items, Bomby Cinder, Cinder Hulk, and Sunfire Cape? Obviously, everybody knows that they burn people around them over time. It's not that great of an item. However, Riot Games has decided to add a new effect. Every 10 seconds, your next immobilizing ability deals bonus damage around you that scales with your bonus health. Not only is there an AoE explosion that damages everything around you, but it also does that bonus damage to the target that you immobilize, which means you're doing double that damage to them. It doesn't make any sense. The tanks are coming, and you better be bringing your cut downs, your void staffs, your Leandries, and your Lord Dominic's regards. Oh yeah, and the black cleavers, because trust me, they are going to be everywhere. And actually, it's not even just tanks. Pretty much anybody who has CC and buys health can just buy a Bomby Cinder for pretty cheap and get bonus damage and more wave clear. That's ridiculous. And just in case you guys don't trust me, let's just spit some facts real quick to end somebody's career. Let's just go over a list of all the champions who would use this in some scenario. You've got Alistar, Amumu, Blitzcrank, Braum, Cho'Gath, Support Galio, Gnar, Tank, Gragas, Hecarim, Irelia, Jarvan, Jax, Kled, Leona, Maokai, Mordekaiser, Nautilus, Nunu, Ornn, Poppy, Ramee, Sejuani, Set, Sen, Singe, Sion, Garner, Taric, Vi, Volibear, Warwick, and Zac. That is over 30 champions across like 4 different roles. Hopefully this makes it clear as day that these changes are massive. You're gonna see way more of items that build out of Bomby Cinder and way more people building it in general, even if they aren't tanks. But this makes tanks really powerful because they are balanced around having a very specific amount of damage, and adding any amount, even if it seems pretty small, like 10 damage early on in the game, that can make a difference because with its cooldown only being 10 seconds and most champions having cooldowns of 10 seconds, this is gonna go off every single time they trade, and that adds up really quickly. Alright, enough doomsaying, let's actually get to the real meat of the patch. Let's talk about the champion changes. And we're kind of sorting everything here based on how impactful the actual changes are. So when you notice that we don't cover Aurelion Soul after Aphelios, don't be surprised. We want to cover things that really matter the most to you guys first. Like that massive Immolate change that's going to completely revolutionize the meta right now. Coincidentally, the first champion we're looking at, Amumu, is also somebody who's going to be able to take advantage of those Cinder Hulk changes. The buffs that he's getting are actually really huge because it addresses one of Amumu's key weaknesses. The speed at which Amumu travels when he hits somebody with his Q is getting increased. The increase is so large, it's like if you could have 3 pairs of boots at the same time and get movement speed from all of them. That's how big the speed difference is now. This means that his ultimate is almost completely unavoidable even if you have QSS and Flash, because the speed at which Amumu travels is so fast that he's gonna get there and be able to ulti before you can QSS and get away. Even if you have like 60% tenacity, it's not gonna matter. You're gonna get comboed, Q into R, and if that isn't enough, his R is also getting a huge buff. The cooldown goes down by 20 seconds and 15 seconds at rank 1 and 2, and on top of that, his R now stops people who are dashing, and this was one of the main problems with Amumu. Somebody like Tryndamere or Talon could use their mobility spells after being hit by an Amumu Q, and then be able to just escape for free over a wall or dash themselves super far away. Or somebody taking a Thresh Lantern could really easily escape his ganks by getting hit by the Q and then immediately taking their escape tool and using it, because Amumu's R would not stop them in place. And this was a huge problem because somebody ganking bot lane as Amumu was almost never going to succeed if he's facing somebody like Thresh or if he's facing somebody like Lucian who could dash even right when he's getting snared by the R. This led a lot of people to start playing AP Amumu when they did play him because as a tank he just wasn't reliable enough and didn't really do enough. But now, especially on top of those Cinder Hulk changes, tank Amumu is absolutely going to have a place. He'll still be one of the best lockdown champions there is, but now he's gonna be even better, especially against people with mobility. Next up, we're gonna be looking at Aphelios, who got quite a few nerfs, and now thankfully, finally, he can no longer hide a full gravity cannon in his pants so that you don't know he has it as his second weapon. That's actually a huge change just on its own, because now you're no longer surprised by what comes out from his sniper rifle shot or by what follows up his ulti. There's no reason to be guessing now, and so you'll be able to react to exactly what guns Aphelios has at all times. Now that the element of surprise is gone, he's also getting a nerf to Calibrum, his sniper rifle, where now using the basic attack that he gets from landing his Q no longer gives him a free auto attack reset on top of that. In a lot of scenarios, Aphelios would be able to use his Q, auto attack somebody, then use the free auto attack on them after the Calibrum hit, and then auto attack them again immediately afterwards. And this was a huge burst of damage. Now you're kind of just relegating to doing something like auto Q auto, where you're only getting 2 hits in instead of 3 in a very short period of time. This nerfs Aphelios' sort of assassin-like capabilities, where when he has a good angle on somebody else who's squishy, he can't just immediately kill them for free now. The changes don't end there though, as his Crescendum turrets see a bunch of nerfs. Basically, they're a lot easier to kill now, for everybody. AoE abilities do more damage, ranged champions do more damage, and the sentries no longer bug out and appear dead right as Aphelios throws them down, which is really important for clarity, because now you're not going to accidentally run into a turret and get absolutely blasted. And the very last change is that Aphelios' ultimate range is going down by 300, and this hurts him all around. Quite the sizable chunk is taken out of Aphelios on this patch. Next up, let's talk about the Sona changes. And the changes here basically completely kill solo lane Sona. Her mana costs go way up, however, she does get the ability to get a mana refund. The key here is that the mana refund happens when she tags an ally with her aura, which means that her increased mana costs won't really matter in lane, and actually it refunds a little bit more than the cost, which is a slight buff to her when she's with an ally. It's actually a pretty decent workaround, and definitely a lot better than these absolutely disappointing Soraka changes that we see. The base stat changes don't really mean very much. All you really need to know is that she has a bit less health as the game goes on, and her mana pool also goes down the longer the game goes on. Something by the amount of about 700 when she hits max level, which sounds like a lot, but realistically, when were you ever buying mana items on Soraka? And did you ever really feel like you were pressured to buy mana regen? No, because all of your items already kind of include it. What Riot did is that they made her Q healing about 33% less. They cut it by a third. But on top of that, they made the healing a lot faster. Instead of being over 5 seconds, it's over 2.5. Then they made the mana cost go up, and they also nerfed the bonus movement speed that it gave by the same amount, roughly 30 to 40%. All in all, this means that Soraka can still easily solo lane. You can't just brute force it like an absolute chimp and survive in the laning phase, because you're not going to be able to just throw a Q out off cooldown and not pay for it. It costs a bit more mana. Now you might be thinking right now, like, wait a minute, that's quite a few changes, you know, her damage is still the same, sure, but the mana cost goes up by quite a bit, and she heals herself less, so, you know, isn't that a bad thing? But that's the thing. You might think that it's bad. However, her W also got a buff, which makes ganking a Soraka lane way safer. Whenever she has the healing from her Q, her W will now cost less health on a percentage-based system, going all the way up to 100% reduction when it's rank 5. So not only is she still safe enough and able to heal enough to stay in lane against basically anybody, even if she isn't having a good time and people come to gank and try and help her, she's not weak or vulnerable in that situation. And I mean really, at the end of the day, with our new Bomby Cinder tank overlords coming in to take over, do you really think a Soraka top lane cares about how much damage a tank is dealing? Make sure you write your answer down on the answer sheet. I'll be collecting it at the end of the video. Unfortunately, it still seems like we're going to be suffering from the Soraka solo lane effect for quite some time. But with that aside, let's talk about the Garen changes, which are actually pretty promising. Garen's Q just got a strict buff. It does more damage at all times. They upped the ratio by 0.1. That might seem like a small change, but remember that it gets used a lot, and it matters for everything from CSing to pushing towers to dealing damage to champions. On top of that, his W sees a pretty major change. When you hit max resistances on the passive, you get a 10% armor and magic resistance buff. That's literally a full rune. Conditioning already exists, and you could stack that with that on top of that. That's crazy, the amount of resistances that you can get just for playing the game. They also decided to change the shield so that it has a base value and scales with your bonus health instead of just being 10% of your maximum health. This is really big and quite the buff to a bruiser style Garen build where you build a lot of items that have health and cooldown reduction as a result usually. You're gonna do slightly more damage and you're gonna be tankier at pretty much all stages. You'll also have a much bigger shield for pretty much any time in the game no matter what build you're running, but if you are running something that has quite the amount of health then you might see that it's a little bit smaller. On top of all this, jungle Garen is also getting a buff, and I say jungle with heavy air quotes because I don't really think anybody's gonna be playing jungle Garen with this. His E just does more damage to all non-epic monsters, which is really nice and will speed up a jungle clear, but I mean, how does jungle Garen gank? Does anybody even play jungle Garen? If you happen to play jungle Garen, let us know because I don't really think that champion is all too popular in the jungle right now. And this change probably isn't gonna see him getting in there either. While it is nice, it just kind of makes him better at stealing jungle camps from his opponents, or from your jungler if you feel like they're really that useless. And that's kind of how a lot of the jungle focus changes are gonna work in this patch here. Let's move on to Gnar. Gnar actually got some pretty decent buffs, and one is more powerful than the other. He got 10 base movement speed, but he lost 10 movement speed in his passive, which means that Mini Gnar is still as fast as he was before, however, Big Gnar is a lot faster now. 10 movement speed faster, which is quite a big amount. You'll be able to run away from ganks, get on top of people, stun them with your W, stun them with your R, throw them around, get away from bad situations, dodge skill shots, whatever you want more often now. And on top of that, the ratio for Gnar's ultimate in his mega form is just absolutely exploding. It's over double what it was previously. The real thing that just makes me endlessly question mark ping in my head is why does Gnar's ulti have a 1-to-1 ability power ratio now? Does anybody even play AP Gnar? These changes aside, Gnar is also getting a jungle buff, where his W passive cap is now 300 at all ranks, and that makes him clear big monsters very quickly. But again, it's more of a thing aimed towards clearing the big camps, doesn't really impact the smaller camps or the smaller monsters. So it's just kind of like, oh yeah, Gnar is better at stealing camps away from people now, whether it be Gromp or a big Krug or maybe a red buff or something like that. And maybe we're just crazy or missing something here, but does anybody even play Gnar jungle, let alone AP Gnar? Like, what's going on? What's Riot trying to do here? It just kind of seems like they're trying to shoehorn people in. I don't know, maybe they're trying to buff people in the jungle so that they can all abuse Cinderhulk while it's ridiculously broken. Who knows? Now let's move on to Lux, who got a really nice change. Not only did she get a buff towards her support role, but she also got something that's been really missing from her kit ever since she came out. She's not been able to flash while casting her ultimate, and that makes her immobile during the cast time, which basically gets her killed every single time she uses it in any fight where she's in close quarters. But now, you can flash during it, and it works just like Ezreal's ulti, where the ultimate will still cast from where you were when you started, but you'll be able to move and finish it wherever you want. That is really powerful and can allow Lux to dodge engages or skill shots, hooks, or whatever it might be while she's casting her ulti. It's huge. On top of that, her Q base damage goes slightly up and the ratio goes slightly down. You're gonna need just about 20 more AP before it feels about the same. However, this change also comes with a cooldown change, which goes down by 2 seconds early on. And considering that Q is the ability that you max second in pretty much any lane, you're probably gonna be feeling a lot of the changes over the course of the game. On top of that, you might even be able to max it last now and opt for more damage or area control in your E as a second ability to max. If you're playing mid-Lux though, obviously you're maxing your E first, and so that's not really the case. However, there is a point to be made for maxing your W second. Maybe you need to fill a more supportive role for your team as you already have a ton of damage and the shielding helps out a lot. Well, that's a great buff for you then, and you'll be able to do it without really feeling bad, because you'll still have a very similar amount of CC and still pretty good damage. Now we've got one last major champion change to cover, and that's about Darius. Darius's jungle change is one of the few exceptions to the changes on this patch. It actually means a lot for solving the problems that Darius normally has in the jungle. Not only is he getting bonus damage on his passive, 20% more on the bleed against monsters, however he can also use his Q to heal off of monsters now, when he's hitting large monsters in the camps, like, the big raptor, red buff, that sort of thing. Darius's main issue is that his clear was very unhealthy. he's kind of balanced around the fact that he couldn't heal off of monsters and he had no way to mitigate their damage. Now his ganks are fine, his clear is going to be great as he's going to be able to heal a ton off of any camp that he decides to fight, and his clear will just be faster than it was before. Now you might be thinking, well, I mean, his ganks are kind of bad, right? He's a juggernaut, he doesn't have any mobility, but the thing is that Blue Smite is there for a reason, and on top of that, Nimbus Cloak exists now. Whenever you cast your Blue Smite, you're basically gonna get a free ghost, and this makes your ganks really spooky, because you can run up to somebody, slow them by a 40%-ish, get a bunch of movement speed, run after them, slow them with your W for 99%, yank them back in with your E, and I mean, if they're not dead by that point, something must have gone horribly wrong somewhere else. Let's also give you guys some extra context around this situation, right? Darius is very good into tanks. He really loves long fights. He can get his passive off and just absolutely dumpster anybody in his path pretty much. So Darius is good into tanks, Cinderhulk gets buff, tank junglers gets buff? Of course, the answer is that if you lose a game, it's always the jungler's fault. Right. Alright, that's all the champion changes out of the way, but we still got some more major things coming in. There's a couple item and rune changes that are pretty big here. First off, let's talk about Stopwatch, which has a really cool change in my opinion. It now works more like magical footwear, where anytime you get a takedown, the amount of time that you have left until you get the item is reduced, in this case by 2 minutes anytime you get a kill or an assist. That's a lot. It only takes 2 kills to get to 10 minutes now, because normally Stopwatch is going to be looking at a 14-minute arrival time now. This is pretty awesome because if you're playing really well, you're rewarded for your kills and your assists and your impact on the map with a stopwatch earlier than you normally would have one. The penalty though is that now you don't get 15% cooldown reduction on the items that build out of Stopwatch. Stoneplate, Zhonya's, and GA no longer are more usable because of the rune. On top of that, Stopwatch on its own costs more now in the shop, 650 gold. There's a lot of interesting back and forth on this rune, and it's no longer the item that just lets you sit in lane until 10 minutes and then completely stagnate the game, ruin the enemy team snowballing, and totally turn the game around in your favor. You gotta be playing good around it, and you gotta wait a little bit longer if you're playing super behind and you're getting destroyed, and it's not gonna let you make up for all of your lack of ability in the early game. Of course, that's never you though. You're always the person destroying the person who then uses a stopwatch, and then you end up losing the game. Anyways though, moving on, let's talk about Halo Blades. Halo Blades is this weird rune where in order for it to come off of cooldown, you gotta be out of combat, and out of combat with anything, not just champions, for 4 full seconds before it comes back. Now, that's getting changed so that it just has an 8-second cooldown, and that's really awesome, because it lets people in lane use it. It can be some really cool synergies with it too. So, you have 8 seconds to wait. And let's say you're playing ranged champions, you're like, Vayne or maybe Jhin, and you go in and you go for a trade, you get 2 autos on your opponent, maybe you have to back away, whatever, but then you can still farm, and eventually the Halo Blades will come back off cooldown, usually before your opponent's rune comes up if they have something like, Airy or Electrocute, or maybe even Fleet Footwork, and then you could get in another trade with them again and use it again. And that's really awesome because before, that was literally impossible. You would have to choose between farming or waiting for a trade, and that really sucked. On top of that cooldown change, you also have more time that you can wait in between attacks. This helps everybody overall because you have more time to play with and you can kite people out before the rune goes on cooldown, and then you have to wait another 8 seconds again. Whew, man, finally, we're done with all of the major changes, but there's still some smaller ones that we should go over. Chase has some pretty minor changes where he gets a little bit more base mana and a little bit more mana growth and a tiny amount of damage on his Q, maxing up at 35 extra damage at rank 5. It's not really all that great, but it might help him in the very late stages of the game, and also, it's just nice in general. He's not doing particularly horrible, and this might be the bump that he needs to really get to that solid 50% mark. Aurelion Soul is seeing a tiny nerf where his W now increases the active star damage by 40% instead of 50%. Not the biggest change, and it definitely hits him in the late game more so than the early game. However, he's already very strong in the late game, and it's not gonna mean all that much. He's just gonna be shredding through you a little bit less, and that's fine. The champion was doing pretty well recently, and he was also kinda flying under the radar. From there, Caitlyn got this weird 10% extra attack speed when she already had 10% at level 1 change. Not really sure what that's going for. She kind of is fine in high elo and really bad in low elo, so Riot's definitely gonna need to work around some changes here. But yeah, it doesn't really seem like this is gonna be all that impactful for her. Rolling into the next spot, Ramee sees a slight buff here where he gets a decent amount of attack speed, where both his base and growth goes up by a decent amount. And this isn't really gonna send him over the top, but it will definitely help him in his clear and when he's skirmishing with other junglers. Attack speed is never a bad thing, especially for Ramee, who has a basically on-hit passive where he does extra damage based on his armor. Singed's base stats get hit pretty hard here actually. He lost 30 health and 3 armor early on, which really makes him very weak against AD damage dealers at all points in the game. Obviously this affects him more so in the early game, as he'll be able to build up stats to make up for that difference, but now he kinda struggles against even some of the weaker AD champions top lane in the early game. Silas is also getting a small buff here on this patch where his Q damage is 20 damage higher at rank 5, and this helps him with his wave clear a little bit for people who are maxing Q early on, so this is more targeted towards Silas mid lane, as usually Silas jungle and Silas top are maxing W and sometimes they're maxing Q. Riot finally decided that they were fed up with the idea of Cloud Drake doing absolutely nothing for Udyr, so now he gets 5% global cooldown reduction for every Cloud Dragon that he kills on his ability timer, which means that for every Cloud Dragon that you kill, you get 0.1 seconds off of your global skill cooldown, which in case you didn't know, anytime Udyr uses an ability, he has a 2-second lockout before he can cast any other thing. Well, yeah, I mean, sure. I guess if you kill 4 Cloud Dragons, you got a 1.6 second lockout instead. Cool. That's definitely the change that Udyr really needed, you know? Then we've got a whole slew of jungle changes that we haven't mentioned yet. Diana passive now does 50% more damage to non-epic monsters, which I mean, yeah, sure, helps her steal her junglers and the enemy junglers' raptors. Awesome. But I mean, really, this is pretty significant because Diana jungle will easily auto-attack over 30 times in her first clear. So that's 10 instances of her doing 50% more damage. This might actually make Diana jungle pretty convincingly good. Then, moving on to Talon jungle, now his passive affects all monsters and it does more damage. But Talon jungle is really kinda just garbage. His ganks are pretty bad and his clear isn't healthy, so I mean, this one's really just, yeah, Talon can steal jungle camps easier. And then Zed gets a similar buff to his passive, where it now does double damage to monsters, and the cap was increased by quite a bit. However, it's not gonna make Zed jungle really a thing. Now it's just not bad instead of it being good, so again, he can really just kinda steal monsters a bit easier. Finally, the last jungle change is to Mordekaiser. And on the other hand, compared to a lot of the other jungle changes, this is actually pretty significant. His passive being able to do more damage to monsters at all points in the game is very good. It'll speed up his clear quite a bit, and because of that, it'll make his clear even healthier, especially when you consider how his W passive works with dealing damage and getting more shielding. This is an awesome change all around for him, and you shouldn't be surprised if you see a Mordekaiser jungle here or there. Exhaust sees a tiny buff, where it now lasts 3 seconds instead of 2.5. You're probably not going to really notice this, but the thing that is really cool is that now it'll tell you how much damage you're reducing by using the summoner spell. And that's awesome because you'll be able to know exactly when you're using it correctly, or if you're using it on the wrong target. Say you use it on somebody like, I don't know, an Ornn, and it ends up reducing like 500 damage, and you're like, wow, yeah, I guess Ornn really does do a lot of damage with his percentage max health. And then next time you use it on somebody like an assassin who you CC anyways, and you're like, oh, it only added 200 damage reduction. Maybe that's not the way to go, and this helps you improve, and it's really nice for players who are always trying to get better. Next up, there's a tiny change to the legend runes, which Riot claims is aimed at pro play, and yeah, it definitely does impact pro play more, because now it requires 25 minions per stack instead of 20. And this really isn't a problem for most people, because getting a champion kill or assist will still give you 1 full stack. So you're not really impacted as much because you're not getting as many stacks from just farming. Still though, don't be surprised when runes like Legend Bloodline that start out at absolutely 0% don't have as much of an effect because they stack up slower overall if a game is not really explosive and has a ton of kills in it. From there, Phase Rush is getting a slight buff. You're actually able to wait longer in between attacks, much like the Halo Blades change, where now you have 4 seconds in between the 3 unique damage sources instead of 3. On top of that, it's getting buffed for melee champions, going from 25 to 40% from everybody to 25 to 40% for ranged and 30 to 50% for melee. and that's a big speed increase, just about 20% across the board. Not too many champions can really take advantage of this though, so it's still not going to see a ton of use, but the people who do take it are definitely going to notice the movement speed increase. Omnistone got a tiny change where it no longer gives you Press the Attack or Conqueror as your level 1 first rune. And I mean, sure, but Omnistone is still really bad unless you're playing a very specific build or specific champion, so you shouldn't be taking it anyways. Then, Unflinching got a tiny change, and it's not really a change, it's more of the fact that it wasn't working, and now it works, so thanks Riot, I guess. It now properly gives you 10% slow resistance whenever you have a summoner spell on cooldown. And with that disappointing reminder of the fact that Riot definitely doesn't have enough people to make sure the game works, that's everything that this patch has to offer. To learn more and get yourself on your journey to improvement, make sure you check out our website, GameLeap.com. We have tons and tons of video guides up there, all made by challenger level players, and we have everything from champion guides all the way back to the very basics. There's something up there for everybody, and we're always trying to bring you guys more and better content so that you can keep improving and keep winning your games. If you notice that we have something missing that you think is very important, make sure you let us know. That way we can try to get to work on it right away. If you made it this far, thanks for watching the whole video. This has been an absolute monster of a video and a monster of a patch. What do you guys think about all the changes? I, for one, reject our new tank jungle and tank top lane overlords, but that's just me. Oh yeah, and don't forget to hand in your answer sheets from the quiz. Anyways, as always, my name is Ace Windstorm, and I will see you guys later.